We're live, we're recording. Okay.
Well, welcome to everybody to our first Zoom uh, recording. So if you're listening on the audio on the podcast and it doesn't quite sound the same, hopefully it sounds good enough for you guys to listen to. It's our first attempt to do a remote COVID interview, because it's the pandemic, right? And you're not supposed to hang out with people. So our first guest for this is somebody I've actually known, like, who is it, like about 15 years?
Uh, it's yeah,
Been a while.
nothing close to 15. Yeah.
So today we got Paul Gaines. He's a freelance journalist, uh, born in the UK. We'll get into his whole story, but born in the UK, went to school in the States, lives in Canada, and interviewed everybody from like Usain Bolt and Lennox Lewis to uh, you know basically politicians, musicians.
Gretzky,
Am I
Ben
not doing the
Johnson.
intro?
Yeah, well, I'm chipping in.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
So, Paul, welcome to the remote, interview, the
Thank
podcast.
you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and it was great how we connected. I was in my OCD nature manner, as I usually am, picking up garbage on trails, and I run into you. You made a comment, and you were taking photos of wildlife, and then we just started talking and talking and talking. And I realized, hey, we need to have you on our podcast talking about your passion about photographing wildlife and the adventures you've been on traveling the world. So that's what intrigued me. And so
whereas being that I've known Paul for a long time, to me it seemed perfect because, like, you're a storyteller. Yeah. So when you can sort of throw out to somebody and then just sort of sit back and then they'll just tell stories, it's perfect.
it is.
Well, you've probably heard about 45 or 50% of my stories. I forget most of them as I age.
Yeah. So let's just do the bio, sort of your history, and then we'll get into some of the more recent adventures. So where were you born?
I was born in Coventry, England, which is right in the Midlands, right in the center of England.
And that's where the accent comes from.
What's left of it? Yeah, I've been here a long time. I still support Coventry City Football Club, and they won yesterday, so I'm very happy about that. But we emigrated to Canada when I was 12 or 13 years old, and things weren't so good in Britain, and my dad lost his job. And Coventry's famous for cars. A lot of the auto factories, Jaguar was there, and famous for Lady Godiva as well. That's where she was from. But when the factory started shutting down, everybody started looking for places to go, and we came to Canada, fortunately. And I became a Canadian citizen, ran track in high school in Toronto, and ended up earning a scholarship to the University of Oklahoma, first of all, and studying architecture there for a couple of years. And then I didn't get along too well with the culture in Oklahoma. So I transferred to Colorado State University, which was much more up my alley, and switched majors to exercise physiology. I mean, completely different, but my whole life has been like that, just going from path to path to path, But and then after university, I came back to Canada and lived in Toronto and worked at Variety Village for 8.5 years, where I was teaching physically disabled kids and adults, and I'm putting on coaching programs for them. And I started doing events to promote disabled sport. And in fact, in 1982, I founded what was then the very first fully integrated track and field competition. I brought in people like Ben Johnson and Mark McCoy and Angela Bailey and others to run in this track meet. They did it as a favor, but it was to attract TV and sponsors and the rest of it. So we had 3 events for able-bodied athletes, and we had 9 events for disabled athletes. So we had probably 1,000 people in the stands, and they got to see these elite athletes compete, plus elite wheelchair athletes like Rick Hansen and others who I'd flown into the competition. So, and then I ended up going into full-time into sports marketing, and for 4 years worked for Landmark Sport Group in Toronto. We represented athlete clients like Kelly Gruber of the Blue Jays, and let me think now, Kirk Muller of the Montreal Canadiens, and Ian Miller of the Equestrian. And so along with doing a few deals for the athletes, I was also the event manager of major events we did. The United Way cricket match at Sky Dome was an award-winning event, and we sold 40,000 plus tickets for Sky Dome for a cricket match, which was just blew everybody's minds away, and a very successful event. And then decided at the ripe old age of, I can't remember what it was now, but I decided at one point that I didn't want to do that when I was 60 years old. So I decided to focus on my freelance journalism. And at the time I was writing for the Globe and Mail regularly, and mainly sports. And then I did a few pieces for the New York Times, and I decided, well, I can do this for a living. And I quit my my sports marketing practice and went into journalism full time. And the break there, I think, was writing for the National Post, because unlike the Globe and Mail that kind of pigeonholed me into athletics and soccer, the National Post allowed me to write on science, music, anything that I was passionate about, and travel and so on. So that opened up, you know, big doors to other avenues. So, and you know, I just followed it since. So it's been 26 years now as a full-time freelancer. So, but,
okay. So 26 years. So that is, yeah, mid 90s. Okay. That was my question. When did that happen? Because I know that lots happened in the whole news industry, but very cool.
Yeah. And it's not a big thing on adventure, but it's something that's interesting to me, is how have you managed the transition? Because like when you started, magazines and newspapers were, you know, paying pretty well. You know, you could make a half decent living. Because I used to do a reasonable amount of freelance writing and bicycle stuff and that kind of thing. And then it just dried up. And how have you made the transition to sort of the internet world?
Well, you're right. Things have changed a great deal. In the good old days, I would come up with an idea for a story, and I would start off thinking, this is good for Maclean's, let's say, or Time. And I would, if they said no, I would go to the New York Times. And then if they said no, I'd go to the, you know, I'd go down my list. I don't want to disparage any other periodicals, but I would, you know, in the glory days, I would get 99% of my stories, my ideas sold, you know, commissioned. So, and occasionally, if you had I learned probably in the early 2000s that if you were able to write on a variety of subjects and look for a variety of topics when you're traveling, you know, editors love it. You know, for instance, I remember when Ben Johnson, I've known Ben for a long, long time. He was training Colonel Gaddafi's son, the leader of Libya, and training him for soccer. And I got a call one day from Ben's agent at the time, and this fellow said, would you like to go and visit Ben in Tripoli? And I said, yeah, why not? That sounds great. And I never thinking that it would happen. So the Libyan government, I hope there's a statute of limitations here, because I don't know if this is if I'm free to speak about it, but I ended up with an airline ticket and free accommodation paid for by the Libyan, the engineering department of the government, which Saadi Gaddafi was in charge of. That was Gaddafi's son. So I ended up going over there. And while there, I did a couple of soccer stories, because the coach of the Libya soccer team was Carlos Bilardo, who would coach Diego Maradona at the club level, and also coached him when they won Argentina won the 1986 World Cup. So Carlos, I'd have breakfast with him almost every day with a translator, and I did a story on him for a couple of British papers and for the National Post. Did a story on Ben's coaching for the National Post. It was a front page story. I visited a place called Leptis Magna, which is an ancient Roman city on the Mediterranean. And it was founded by the only Roman emperor born outside of Rome, and he was from that area. So he built this big city that had been buried under silt and sand for centuries, and only was excavated in the early 1900s. And nobody would go to visit it. So the day I went, I had a guide, a taxi driver take me out there, and I'm walking through these streets. It's like ancient Rome, but with no tourists. And I did a story for Equinox magazine for that, and for British Airways High Life magazine. So the point I'm making, in the glory days, you could make one trip, and I'd do a business piece for somebody. In fact, I did a piece for Business Traveler on doing business in Tripoli. So I had probably 10 assignments. So I'd come back. Those trips, were a godsend because I'd make a lot of money. And you're right that things have changed so much now that. But I've branched now to a little bit more of magazine writing. It's harder and harder to get a piece in the newspapers these days. They have no freelance budget. I did a piece on, speaking of Ben Johnson, in the last piece I did for a Canadian paper was a Toronto Star feature I did on Johnson a year ago or 2 years ago. I've done regular features for travel features for British newspapers. They still have a little bit of money and a little bit more interest, and some of the editors there still know me. Whereas that's the other issue. As you age, newer people come in, and the older crowd moves out, and you have to prove yourself again. And I think a lot of editors don't respect history and respect experience. That's from my experience anyway. But still make a living. I would be making a lot more money if I was still in sports marketing. But as I tell my kids, I have 3 kids in their 20s, and I've told them, we're not put on earth to work. We're put here to live, and work is a means to enjoy life. So pick something you really enjoy doing and get to it and be good at it. So I have 2 musicians and an architecture student. So they're following their passions.
Well, because that's the part of the plan as a parent, is you have to have at least, get your kids into good careers so then they can look after you when you're older.
Yeah, exactly.
Like my daughter's, going to school to be a vet, so I'm covered.
Well, my brother's a veterinarian actually, and was teaching at the Royal Veterinary College in England. So I know about the work that goes into being a veterinarian. It's not an easy profession, but
No.
Like a lot of things these days, more difficult.
So how did you fall into wildlife photography and the adventures around that?
I've traveled. I've been to more than 30 countries, I think. Sometimes, like Japan, I've been 6 times. I've been to Ethiopia 4 times, and China twice, Lebanon 3 times. And it was on a trip I used to take a lot of photographs. I took a couple of courses in university in photography, and it was more architecture stuff. And I did sports photography for a few magazines in the 80s and 90s. But I was on a trip to Ethiopia, and I was asked by a friend of mine. If you know running, you would know the name Haile Gebrselassie. Haile was a 2-time Olympic champion, 4-time world champion, broke 27 world records. And over the years of me interviewing him, we've become friends. Now he's a very successful businessman he's got a 1,000-hectare coffee plantation. He's got 5 or 6 hotel resorts, a gold mine. Has office towers. He had Ethiopia's first cinema. He's into all those things. Well, he insisted on my first trip to Ethiopia. He says, "Paul, I want you to see my hotel resort on Lake Hawassa. It's very nice." He says, I want you to go see it." So I'd gone there with a film crew. I was getting them interviews with all the top Ethiopian runners because I know most of them. And so I had a couple of days off. So I said, "Yeah, Haile, I'd love to." So he had a driver take me. It's only 250 kilometers, but it takes about 5 or 6 hours because the roads are not so good, and you have to stop when herds of donkeys and goats and other livestock cross the roads. Anyway, I was staying at his hotel in Lake Hawassa, and I had I'd sold my film camera, and I had a digital camera, and I was staying at Lake Hawassa, this hotel resort there, and I was being treated like royalty because Haile would call every couple of hours and see how I was doing. Was I enjoying myself? You know, he's the great host. He was still an Addis, but I was in Hawassa. And I guess he'd given instructions to the managers to make sure I had a good time. So early one morning, I had one of the managers take me out on a boat with a guide across Lake Hawassa to look for hippos. And you know, there we go out, and there's a couple of hippos in the water. My first picture of two hippos, as Haile likes to remind me, was of two hippos having sex. And that's anyway. So I had these pictures, but this experience. So the first animal I actually photographed was a hippo, which sounds very exotic, but I think back now and I look at those the people on the beach of Lake Hawassa, the locals, were washing their clothes in the water, you know, 40 or 50 meters away from the deadliest animal in Africa. And it occurred to me that seeing a hippo is nothing to them. Mm-hmm. They're more interested in looking at me, looking at the hippos. They're going, what are they? What's so fun? So much fun for this guy to see these hippos. We see them every day. And so that was sort of my first thing, interest in photographing wildlife. I've always loved wildlife. You know, my parents, we used to sit around my parents when we were younger and watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and any nature program that came on. And the whole family were fascinated by it. And we did a lot of camping when we were when we first came to Canada from England. So, you know, I had that interest, and then I decided to upgrade my camera, and I got an entry-level Nikon, and I started, you know, photographing local wildlife. And then, you know, I started using some of the trips where, you know, if somebody was paying my ticket, you know, flying me to Brazil, for instance. I worked for CBC in the Rio Olympics in 2016. So as soon as the Olympics were over, I flew from Rio to Sao Paulo, and then from Sao Paulo to a place called Cuiabá, which is in the Brazilian Pantanal. And so all I had to pay for was my ticket from Rio to Cuiabá and back. I arranged for the CBC folks to fly me home from Rio 10 days later. So I had time to spend at this ranch in Cuiabá. I had a guide pick me up at the Cuiabá airport, drive me 5 hours down this, they call it the Transpantanal Highway, but it's really, you can't even call it a dirt road in some places. The driver literally had to get out in some places and replace planks of wood so we could cross these streams, because otherwise there's no way to cross it. And, you know, so anyway, so I spent 5 days on that trip photographing jaguars with a guide, and getting up every morning at 5 and being on a boat at 6 o'clock in the morning. And, you know, the hotel would pack a lunch for us, and the guide and I, just the two of us, would be on this boat, and with remote controlled, radios, all the guides would communicate with one another to give other photographers a heads up as where they might find a jaguar. So when one guy would see a jaguar, they get on the radio, and everybody turns the boats around and goes looking to the same spot. Mm. So you know, so it was, and I end up doing stories for 2 magazines and a British newspaper on that trip, just on jaguars. So it's sort of, you know, I've just become obsessed with wildlife photography and spreading the message that we share the planet with all this wildlife, and every form of wildlife has its part. You know, Catherine, you and I were talking last week about vultures, and to most people look at vultures and they think, what an ugly bird, and if they died out, you know, big deal. But in Africa, in Ethiopia in particular, the Ruppel's vulture and the griffon vulture are endangered species, because like farmers here and farmers in the United States and all around the world, they have predators that attack their wildlife. So in the case of in Ethiopia, it's wolves and hyenas. So the farmers will put poison in carcasses and then hope that the hyenas and wolves will eat it and die, so they don't come and kill more. But the byproduct of that is that vultures will come and feed on the carcass, eat the poison, and they die. But if you don't have vultures to take care of the carrion, you get an enhanced possibility of disease. So, but and you sort of see this when you travel around the world to these different places and experience that firsthand.
That's a big topic. There has been some discussion, I think it was in Rogan, he was talking about it, about diseases, right, and transmission from animals to humans, and how really COVID right now, it's very deadly and widespread, but there could be far worse diseases spread. So speaking to your point that the life of every wildlife is important to our ecosystem.
Yeah,
to
we
keep
all
us safe.
do a job.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that no matter where you are, people take local wildlife for granted. And I'm losing my voice a little bit. I apologize, but there's been where I live in Cambridge. I can sit on my balcony most mornings, and I have been since COVID. I'll make my pot of coffee, sit outside, 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, and I've got my coffee. I read my New York Times on my laptop, and I've got my camera with a long lens on it ready, because in the wooded area behind me, I've seen Cooper's hawks, I've seen merlins, which is another form of falcon. I've seen foxes. There's usually a fox that will come by most mornings. And this is right outside, deer and everything. And, it's just, if people take the time to look around and not be in such a hurry, they're going to see these things and then appreciate them more. So I do a lot of presentations. I'm doing one January 28th for ID Exchange, which will be on, I'm calling it World Wildlife Encounters, and it'll be, some of the highlights of my travels, and the pictures that go with them. And I'm actually working on a book on the same token. I want to take people around the world where I've gone, to Ethiopia, to,
Nice.
Patagonia and places, and then bring them back to appreciate local wildlife, like the wolves I've been photographing up in Killarney the last 5 weeks, and bears and so on, as well as bald eagles that are 10 minutes drive from here. There's, we have bald eagles on the Nith River and the Grand River. And, if you take the time and know where to look, you'll see them fishing, it's incredible.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like most people, even if they do outdoor activities, are too active to see any animals, because it usually requires being, still and quiet for a while. Right? Because a lot of times, because we make so much noise when we're going through an area, everything's gone by the time you get there. That's why, a lot of people don't realize, like, if you're out in the forest, in Algonquin or Killarney, there's bears around you and you never see them because your noise drives them off.
Yeah.
Well, what are your tips to have that experience? Gear, tips, food,
For being out doing wildlife photography?
Yeah, like to actually get to see them.
Well, like you say, one thing is, unless you're in bear country, be quiet when you're out there. You don't want to surprise a bear, so it's best to not to sneak up on a bear or I think most human and bear encounters that end badly are ones where a bear hasn't heard a person approaching.
Mhm.
But if you're hiking with somebody else, it's okay to talk, but you're gonna, you know, probably one of the foremost experts on black bears in Canada is a guy named Mike McIntosh at a place called Bear With Us. And I met Mike because in 2018, I was camping in Killarney. I always I prefer to go September, October, November, when there's fewer people around and it's quieter and you have access to wildlife more readily. Well, I had a black bear cub that was foraging for acorns, probably 50, 60 meters away from my tent for 3 days. And I wrote about this bear for Grand Magazine, and the story was reprinted in the Record newspaper and a bunch of other papers. But I watched this bear for 3 days, and there was no siblings, there was no mother, and you know, she was basically looking very forlorn. I have pictures of her lying down like a puppy and just staring at me with her head, you know, on her hands, on her paws. And my last night camping there, about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard this loud, very, very husky sounding roar. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't, I doubt it was a cougar. I'm guessing, and I assume it was an adult bear. And the next morning I couldn't find the cub. And I thought, you know, I know adult bears, males will kill cubs. You know, anyway, I went looking for this cub and I couldn't find her. And I was leaving for Sudbury the next day to visit my son, who's an architecture student up there. So I went into the office at Killarney and I told them about the cub, and they said, we're aware of the cub, and she won't survive the winter without her mother. We're going to have to call the ministry. So she was eventually darted and taken to Bear With Us, where Mike McIntosh was. At that time, he had 50 bears, bear cubs. He's got 68 there this year. It's worse. You know, all these are orphan cubs. And it's the conflict with residential hunters, mainly. People shooting bears, not knowing that it's a sow with cubs that are perhaps hidden away. So the poor cubs are left to fend for themselves, and without intervention, probably aren't going to survive. But one of the things I learned from Mike was he said to me, the amount of time you spend outdoors up in bear country, he says, you've probably had hundreds of bear encounters and didn't know it. Mm-hmm. It's something that you and I have talked about, Winston, where, you know, when they're out there, there's thousands of bears, but they don't want to be seen. They don't want to interact with people. The unfortunate thing is when you know, people who don't know what they're doing or leaving food out in campgrounds, on backcountry trails, things like that, you know, they attract bears for the easy pickings. That's why a lot of rural areas have dumps, you know, town dumps and so on. And like in Killarney, they have bears going there all the time because they found that they can get food there. I mean, I know a lot of people in Killarney now. I've been going there for 4 years, and I've been there 5 times since October, late of October, and here we are in December. I was there last weekend, in fact. And I go into this place called Pitfields, and the guy, it's a variety store and grocery store, and the fellow there, I'll say to him, have you seen bears? He says, oh yeah, there's lots of bears. You pull into the dump, he says, they'll help you unload. So, you know, they accept the fact that the bears are coming in there because it's easy pickings. And you know, it's, you know, if you want to see wildlife, you've got to be patient and know what to look for as well. You know, I've been fortunate to photograph a lot of wolves this year up in the Killarney area. I did a blog on my website a couple of weeks ago about what I'd seen. I saw this beautiful gray female wolf when I was leaving to come back to Cambridge about 3 weeks ago, she'd crossed the road, the Highway 637. And some of the experts will say that, you know, you shouldn't be seeing wolves around roads. If you do, there's something wrong with them. And I don't know if that's completely true, because I don't believe it, because if you look at a map of the Killarney Peninsula, there's only one road going through it. And I'm sure I've seen these wolves, and they'll come out onto the road, they'll trot along the road, and they'll cross a bridge, then they'll go into the woods and vanish. So they use the roads as you know, sort of to get elsewhere, you know, for their routes. But you know, this particular evening, I saw this this wolf, and I raced my car down the road. There's very little traffic on that road as well. Raced across the road and slammed on the brakes. Remembered to put my car into park, and jumped out. I always have the camera on my passenger seat, and I jumped out, and I'm forever adjusting the controls on my camera, you know, so that I can be sure that I'm going to be, if not perfect exposure, pretty close to it when by the time I jump out, and then I adjust on the fly. But I jumped out of this particular time, and I'm looking up and down this ditch at the side of the road, and I'm looking for this wolf, and I'm going, where did she go? I can't see her. And then I looked up, and I tried to guess where she had crossed, and if she had gone up, you know, trotted up the side of this hill. And there she was behind some trees and bushes, staring at me. And I said, don't you go anywhere. I'm, you know, got my camera out. I'm photographing her. I fired off maybe half a dozen shots before she turned and ran. And I believe it's the same wolf I saw 2 weeks later, a couple of kilometers away from, you know, but she came, I went looking for her that day, and I was driving along this road very slowly. And I'm thinking, okay, I saw her along this stretch of road. I wonder if I'm going to see her along here. And as luck would have it, I'm driving 30, 40 kilometers along this road, and she came running past me, just trotting past me, you know, right in the other lane. And I stopped my car, jumped out, and I have these shots of her as she trotted away from me with her head turned towards me the whole time. And she stopped and then darted into the woods, and was gone. But you know, there's so much wildlife out there. You know, a lot of it has become used to humans. You know, I always tell people that I've done things that I wouldn't recommend a photographer do. But I feel confident one-on-one with an animal that the animal is not going to be spooked or is not going to be dangerous. And you know, I think back to one of my trips to Ethiopia. I hired a guide to take me to the Bali Mountains in the south of Ethiopia. I spent a night there with at Hailey's resort first, and again saw hippos. And you know, whenever I talk to Hailey, he thinks I'm the luckiest man in the world, because not everybody gets to see these hippos. But anyway, the guide took me into the Bali Mountains, and we went looking for the Ethiopian wolf, and the best place to find them is in the Bali Mountains. And these are the same size as our wolves, but they're red and they look like giant foxes. Mm-hmm. They're called Ethiopian wolves, or Abyssinian foxes is another name for them, but they're a wolf. And there we were on this, my first morning out, and I spotted one, and I've got a guide and a driver, and I said, there's one there. And I pointed on the hill, and they went, where? And I joked with them. I said, why am I paying you? But they had a good laugh over it. But you know, I knew what I was looking for, and it was trotting back and forth when it saw our car. And all she wanted to do, this wolf, was to come down and have a drink of water. There was a water hole near where we were stopped. So I said to the guide and the driver, the three of us were standing on the side of the road, and I know she was intimidated because she was trotting back and forth. And I said, you know, maybe if you guys get in the van, she'll come down for a drink. So the two of them got in the van. So now she only sees one person on the road, less danger than she would have felt prior. And then so she came down and took a drink of water. And every now and then she's got water dripping from her tongue, and I got a whole bunch of shots of her standing there looking at me. And then another vehicle, I mean, there's no traffic in these national parks, but on that particular occasion, another van happened to come by, and they saw me taking pictures of the wolf, and the van stopped right in front of me, and all these tourists are leaning out the window with their cameras, and spooked the wolf, and she ran across the road and onto this plateau. It's the Saneti Plateau. It's about 14,000 feet above sea level. No trees grow there. It's just, you can see as, you know, it's flat and you can see forever. So I said to my guide, you know, when the other vehicle drove away, I said to the guide, I'm going to follow her. And he said, oh, no, no, no. I said, no, I'll be okay. He says, but she, you know, it's a wolf, he says. And I said, yeah, don't worry. She'll run before she'll attack me because it's wide open. I'm not cornering her. Yeah. So I followed her across the plateau. And on that trip, I only had a 70 to 300 millimeter lens. I now carry a 150 to 600, which is, you know, my go-to lens with a Nikon D500 camera. And the 70 to 300 meant that you'd have to be so much closer to get these pictures. And I followed her for an hour, hour and a half, I guess. And for 45 minutes of that time, I was sitting on the ground, and she's going about her business. She's digging in these holes looking for mole-headed rats, which live at high altitudes and on the plains up there. And these rats are like our gophers or groundhogs, and they're you know, the wolves go looking for them every morning. So there she was digging in the holes, and every now and then she looked at me to see if I was still there. And I'm sitting on the ground, and she's ignoring me, and it's just one-on-one experience, you know. And when she couldn't find a mole-headed rat after about 45 minutes there, she turned and trotted off. And I walked a kilometer back to where the road was and where the guide was, and delighted with the pictures. And you know,
well, how far were you from the wolf when she was digging for the mole-headed rats?
I'm looking out my window at some trees. I'm thinking it was probably 20 or 30 meters. Okay. So it's relatively close, but not right upon her. You know, like she obviously, you know, it's a rule of thumb that if an animal or a bird stops doing what it was doing because of your presence, and you're too close, and you shouldn't be there.
Okay, that's a good rule. That's a good takeaway. What are some other tips around that? So obviously you're not running towards the animal, but how long should you expect, you know, for it to take to get as close as you can? Do you know what I mean? Like, what are some tips? What are some?
It's I mean, I wouldn't do that with a grizzly. You know, I was in Alaska in 2017, and I was a photographer friend of mine had drawn me a map of where I would find grizzly bears during the salmon spawning in September. So I went exactly where he said, and he'd written on the back of a placemat at a bar we were having chicken wings at. And because I said to him, I'm out here in Yukon for 10 days. Pete, where do I go to see grizzlies? I got to see a grizzly. And he drew this map in Haines, Alaska. So I drove down there and got a hotel room, and then went looking for the grizzlies. And, you know, this grizzly came out onto the river to fish for the salmon after about, you know, I'd been there maybe 4 hours. And so, you know, I was thinking to myself, okay, I hope Pete was right about this. And anyway, a grizzly came out, and I watched it. It was in the middle of this river, and I was probably 50 meters away, 40, 50 meters. But my car was relatively close, and the doors were unlocked in case I need to make a run for it. But that's the other thing. You're not going to outrun a bear. You know, on open ground, they're too fast, you know, and you wouldn't want to trigger their predatory instinct, because if you turn and run, a bear is going to give chase like a wolf would. It's, you know, I haven't had to do that to protect myself. I haven't had to back away slowly, but you know, the experts do tell you that, and all the literature I've read tells you that. Be careful.
I was in the Yukon as well, and we were in Haines, and we didn't see any bears. So finally we get to Skagway. We're like, we need to ask where to find a bear. So same thing, the salmon were running. We went to this field, and there were these two adolescent bears, no mother, but you could tell they were new at it because they weren't being very successful. So we just parked and watched as the river came by our car. They were just constantly coming down. And then there's this photographer that was out there. No word of a lie, he must have been 10 feet away from them. And we're like, oh my God, this is going to be so bad. Do you know what I mean? And he made it, he was fine, but I don't think I'd ever do that.
Well, there's a wonderful program on Netflix. Canon, I'm a Nikon photographer, but Canon does this remarkable series called Tales by Light.
Yes, yes.
And there's one of my favorite photographers is an American named Art Wolfe. And on one of his episodes, it's funny because he part of the episode, he's in the Ethiopian highlands in the Simeon Mountains, where I went in 2017. And he's photographing in the exact same locations I was, these gelato baboons and a lammergeier, the bearded vulture that they're beautiful to watch, these things. These are vultures that they eat bones. You know, most vultures just eat the flesh, but they'll go and take the bones and fly 300 or 400 meters in the air and drop the bones onto rocks below, which shatters them, and they go down and they've now got mouth-sized pieces, and they'll eat the bones. But Art Wolfe was in that place in Ethiopia, the Simeon Mountains. But then part of the episode, he's actually in Alaska photographing grizzly bears, and he sets up his tripod in the middle of this stream, which is only, I'm guessing, a foot or less deep, but it's full of salmon, and there's a dozen grizzly bears all around. They're running past him, and the first time I saw that, I thought, you know, I couldn't do that, but I know that they're not interested in a human. You're not doing anything to them. They're interested in the salmon.
Yeah.
You know? And it's the same with, in Ontario, we have black bears. We don't have grizzlies. And, you know, black bears, they have no interest in people unless you've got something that they want. And if you're, you know, if you own a cottage and you're leaving pet food out on the porch, or you're not clearing away rotten apples that have dropped, you know, and they're on the ground, those are attractants. And most people's reaction when they see a bear is going to be, oh no, I got a bear on my property. And they call the Ministry of Natural Resources, and the ministry doesn't want to kill them. So they'll say, you know, shoo them away, you know, bang some pots and make some loud noise and frighten them. And that's what you should do, you know. But there's people out in rural areas who will shoot the bears, and that's how we end up with orphan cubs. But so, you know, I apparently, according to Mike McIntosh at Bear With Us, I apparently have had many bear encounters and don't know about them. But the ones that I've had, I've been perfectly safe. You know, I don't go out of my way to get too close. It would be a different story. Like what Art Wolfe is doing is he knows that all they're interested there is in the salmon, you know. There's another photographer I'm thinking of, British photographer, name escapes me. It'll probably come to me by the end of our conversation. But this fella has a picture of a polar bear, and he claims he's got the world's first selfie taken in a polar bear's eye because he's 2 feet away from a polar bear. Yeah, but what it is that, you know, and I've read about this, and I read constantly about wildlife, and polar bears, you know, are very, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. And I mean, people in Churchill walk around with guns and, you know, escort each other because bears come into town. So, but this fellow, there's a period of time where they and the locals want the same thing. They want to harvest fish. So they're not as dangerous apparently at that period of time. So when this fellow was up there taking pictures of polar bears, he's in a boat, and these two polar bears came to the edge of the ice, and they're sniffing him, and he's getting very, very low to their eye level, and with a wide angle lens and taking pictures. And that to me is I mean, a lot of wildlife photographers would condemn him for taking chances, but he got the shot. Now, I'm not condoning that myself, but there are occasions where a photographer will get a great shot. My mind is jumping ahead now to a conversation I had with Steve Winter from National Geographic. I met Steve, he's twice won the World Wildlife Photographer of the Year award. And Steve I met him in Brazilian Pantanal in 2016. He spoke at Center in the Square in Kitchener 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And we had lunch that day, he and I, and we were talking about the Pantanal, and he was down there for, I think, 3 months. I was there for 4 or 5 days. And the first morning we photographed cubs. And, you know, and I remember saying to him, my first morning in the Pantanal and I'm seeing cubs, you know, unbelievable, beginner's luck. And he said, every day in the Pantanal is beginner's luck. Well, during our lunch, we were talking about these jaguars, and he pulled out his cell phone and he showed me a picture on his cell phone of a jaguar splashing through the water next to his boat. And he said, I took this with a wide angle lens. Now, any of your viewers will recognize that a wide angle lens means you've got to be up close to it because it tends to distort the angle of view. So he's very close. I said, how close were you to this jaguar? And he said, from here to that next table, we're in a restaurant. Oh. So like 5 feet away. And you know, it amazes me. You know, his lesson there was that jaguar wasn't interested in him. That jaguar was going after caiman crocodile. You know, they're not in, you know, I had an experience with my guide, Fabrizio Dorillo, my guide in the Pantanal. He'd worked for several weeks with Steve before I came down there. He took a week off of working with Steve to guide me for the time I was there. And one occasion, we were tracking a jaguar, and it was probably it was on the shore, and it went down this stream, the side of the stream, and it was basically looking for wildlife. It was on the trail of something. And all these boats of photographers, there was Gavin Thurston, who shoots for Planet Earth, and all the what's his name, David Attenborough, for all his programs. So Gavin Thurston was there with a film crew. They were doing a show for Netflix. There was Bertie Gregory from National Geographic, who was shooting video for National Geographic in another boat, and Steve, and there was a bunch of Italian photographers and tourists as well, like about 8 or 9 boats. And we're all following this jaguar slowly as if you know how cats walk around your apartment, around your house, you know, they go slowly. They conserve every bit of energy. They sleep most of the day, and jaguars are just the same. But when they're ready to go, they'll spring into life. So this thing was walking along, and all of a sudden, all the boats are getting bumping around, and our boat is closest to the path of this jaguar. And I'm zooming back from my camera because we're so close. We're probably 15 feet away from this jaguar. And I'm imagining this jaguar running, taking 2 steps and leaping and having me for lunch. And I said to Fabrizio, he's awfully close. And he says, oh, I know this jaguar. He's laid back. So he wasn't worried about this jaguar. And I told that story to Steve Winter, and Steve said, yeah, he's not interested in you because you brush your teeth, you use deodorant. They don't want that smell. You know, it's not something they enjoy. So they're not interested in a human. So you know, and that's a guy who's been shooting for National Geographic for probably 30 years. So you know, over time, you pick up a lot of these things, and you know, I'm still very, very cautious in comparison to most of these guys.
Well, I got a question, 2 questions for you. So in terms of safety, right, and distance to the animal, you can cover off a lot of that with lenses. So what are the lenses that you recommend people travel with for the purpose of being safe and still getting the shot?
Well, it's funny. I have what's considered a budget lens, the Tamron 150 to 600 millimeter lens. And it cost me, when it came out, I think it was $1,300. Now, a prime lens at 600 millimeters is going to cost you more like $18,000, right? Now, it's going to be far better quality, but they weigh a ton. And if you're going to get a prime lens, you're not going to be able to handhold it because it's too heavy to hold. So you're going to need a tripod. So a tripod for that is going to set you back another $800 to $1,000. And then you're going to need what's called a gimbal head, which allows you to move the camera around with ease to track birds in flight or animals or whatever. That's another $800 to $1,000. So you're going to have deep pockets to do that. And the other part of it is that sometimes, you know, for instance, when I was hiking in the Simien Mountains in Ethiopia, I was there for 4 days. We were camping at 4 different camps along this route of through the most majestic countryside. It's like I call it the Grand Canyon on steroids. It's spectacular. Nobody expects to see these pictures and think that it's Ethiopia, because it looks more like Utah or Arizona, the Grand Canyon areas. And but so I'm hiking. I took 2 camera bodies and 2 lenses, a wide angle lens for landscapes, and I took my 150 to 600 millimeter lens. Now you can imagine, I'm hiking, and we're going up and down mountains, at 14,000 feet above sea level. So you've got that issue of lack of oxygen. I remember, in fact, Art Wolf in his Netflix program talking about how he was out of breath trying to hold the camera still, to get pictures of a lammergeier. And he mentions this in his program. And it's true. Now I know that he didn't hike where we did. There's a road nearby. They probably went with all their film crew by car to these locations. I hiked for 4 days. I wouldn't be able to carry a tripod, a gimbal head, and a prime lens all that way. I can carry by the tripod mount that's on the camera. I can carry my camera that way. And my guide, Jonas, he was good enough he wasn't struggling with the altitude like I was. And I was in good shape for that trip as well. I, really got myself in good shape. He would carry my longer lens sometimes, and then we'd swap. But there's a reason for that I have that lens. Could I get better shots with a prime lens? In some cases, yes, it'd be sharper. but newspaper and magazine editors are buying my pictures as they are, and I sell the occasional print as well. And so I'm content with what I have. You know, I was in Patagonia in December, and the same situation. We were tracking pumas, and you're up at 4:15 in the morning, in the back of a van at 4:30, and the guide, the tracker, and there was three of us, the tracker, the guide, and me. I always like to go by myself and hire the best tracker or guide. They're going to get me into position, know what I want. And so we're in the back of the van at 4:30, and we drive to a location, and the sun hasn't come up yet. But when it comes up, it'll be up for 18 hours in the Southern Hemisphere in December. So there we are, and we have coffee in the back of the van while the guide, he's got his binoculars out and he's scouring the landscape for clues to the location of a puma. So, on the last night, the last day, it was the last evening. We went out, we'd go out in the morning at, as I say, 4:30 in the morning. Sun would be up by 5, and we'd stay out till 10 or 11, which is, in any other circumstance, that would be a full day's shooting. But then we'd go back for a rest and lunch, and I would download my pictures to the computer, and then, or go for a little hike, in the area, and then come back, and then we'd go out again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes 11 o'clock. So on the last night, there we were, we had, I joked with the guide and the tracker. I said, this is my last night here. We're going to see a hunt tonight. We're going to see a successful puma hunt is what I meant. And, they laughed, because it's not often seen, put it that way. So they were laughing, and anyway, we went out, and so here's the guide, the tracker. He's got his binoculars out, and he's looking across the top of this mountain. He sees a herd of guanacos. They look like llamas, but they're smaller, cameloid. And there was a herd of them, and he's looking for clues for the location of a puma, because they can outrun a puma at long distance. The puma's got to get close enough to them to catch them in a short burst, or he won't eat. So he's watching the herd, and he notices, one of the sentries. It seems like the herds will have one who's sort of designated to, while the others are grazing, one is checking out all the surroundings. So he spots the head of a puma with his binoculars, and he said, "There's a puma up there. Okay, get everything you need now. We can't come back to the vehicle. We have to hike." So again, on the spur of the moment, this wasn't planned. I'm glad I had my, budget level 150 to 600 millimeter lens, because I can carry it, hand hold it. We had to hike 3 kilometers to get into position. We had to go up this mountain, go around where the puma was located, so she couldn't see us, and then get into position on the other side. So it's 3 kilometers of walking or hiking, whatever you want to call it, and then be ready to handhold. And as soon as we got into the location, she saw us, the puma, and she stood up, and then she started walking along the edge of this cliff. And I'm firing away all these pictures, and Rex Bringleson, who's my guide, is next to me, and he's taking pictures as well. And our tracker has gone up onto the top of this hill, and he's looking at both the advancing puma and the herd of guanacos are on the other side of this peak. And we're taking pictures. The puma's walking towards us, coming closer and closer. Rex says to me, and I thought he knew what he was doing. He says, "Paul, I feel a bit self-conscious with a puma walking towards us." And I looked at him and I said, I thought you knew what you were doing." And he just, anyway, he's just kind of joking. Anyway, the puma, again, was approaching, then slowly veered off, and, walking very slowly up the top, and went over the top of this peak. we went around the peak where our tracker was, and we stood there, and he was saying, stay right there, stay right there. And the puma lay down behind some grass, and you could see her on the top of this hill, and she's looking down at us. But she's more interested in the guanacos, and they're grazing on the side of this cliff, and they're coming up, slowly moving closer and closer and closer. And my heart was just about pounding here now, because now we can see there's going to be a hunt. Like this puma is going to, these guanacos don't see the puma, and they're walking into her target zone. And anyway, just in, we were standing there, and all of a sudden she launches her attack, and I'm able to handhold, click, 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 click. The herd changes direction and running past us to avoid going over this cliff. So the puma changes direction, and she's running head on, and I've got shots of her coming right past me, almost right head on. And she's sprinting by. At the bottom of the hill, they disappeared because there was a little gully, and I had to anticipate where they might reappear. And I did, and just then, the guanaco, it was a baby, they call them chilangos. It came out of the gully and with the puma literally on its tail, and she sunk her claws into the back of it and dragged her down. So I got the shots of the hunt, and then she dragged, she killed it and dragged it away and started eating it, which I also documented to a point. And then when I was satisfied I had enough gore, I said, okay, that's it. And we went back and we had a celebration at the ranch we're staying on, and everybody was buying each other drinks, and I had stopped drinking, but I had a couple of beers that night, and I said to Rex, I said, Rex, how many times have you seen a hunt? He said, I've been guiding for 20 years. That's my second. So it is extremely, extremely rare, and I was extremely lucky.
Well, I think what some of the takeaways are here is carrying light enough load, right? That you can go into the grounds of the animals, not just from the roads. You want to be fit. You want to, be adjusted to the altitude if there's an altitude adjustment. But yeah, and it's patience, right? Patience and having the guide. I have another question, because you're going to some pretty exotic, not necessarily, what's the word I want to say? Developed, civilized, like in the developed world, like my family in Brazil. The fact, I'm curious as to how you work out the logistics to find a guy that will safely, not corruptly, not basically kidnap you and then hold you, because that happens. You can't even wear, and I thought I was a pretty savvy traveler, and I was listening to the Fedor's travel guide. I'm like, hey, to you, Uncle Roy, can you take us to the mountains? And he's like, what? I refuse to go there. It's so isolated, and you'll definitely be hijacked. And like, no, you don't travel at night in a car on a highway. No, they'll just like barricade the highway and take you at gunpoint, and for your money. So how do you safely explore these places with very expensive camera? And yeah.
Well, when we were in Rio, I was more scared than I've ever been anywhere in the world. And I've walked the streets of Tripoli, Libya, when Colonel Gaddafi was in power, and I've been to Moscow, where you have criminals everywhere, and I've been to a lot of places that have scared me. Rio, CBC was worried about all of us, so our drivers were instructed to take different routes every day to the stadium. We were supposed to go nowhere on our own. And they instilled this fear in you. Yeah, so I didn't enjoy Rio so much. But when I got out to Porto Jofre, which is where this ranch was, where I met up with my guide, I was worried about leaving my camera equipment in my room to go to my meals. Mm-hmm. And I was told, everybody here has expensive cameras, don't worry about it. And it basically, what's happened in some of these places, they cater now to ecotourism, because and it's the same in a lot of places. The ranch I stayed in Patagonia, it's called Laguna Amaga, and it's just outside Torres del Paine National Park. And it's a huge, huge ranch. I think it's like 40 kilometers long. And what has happened now, the owners of the ranch have realized that they can make more money by having tourists come there and see the pumas than by shooting a puma so that so the puma won't maybe attack one of their sheep.
Yeah.
So, and that's happened in Brazil as well.
Okay.
So when I stayed in Brazil, the ranchers there, 98% of the land in the Pantanal is owned by ranchers, and they are now doing the same thing. They're building hotels, not really hotels, but accommodation for people who want to come down and see the wildlife.
So how do you find these ranches that are reputable?
Through the guides. And whenever I go somewhere, I will, when I go to Ethiopia, I've been there 4 times, and 3 of those times I've used the same company called Boundless Ethiopia. It's an Ethiopian woman and her Dutch husband who own the company. So they've always done things, and they are the minutia of detail they go through is what I want to see. Mm-hmm. So I trust them implicitly. When I went to the Pantanal, I found Fabrizio. He was recommended to me by another guide who was reputably the best puma guide in the area. Unfortunately, he told me he was busy. He had a client the same time I was going to be there, so he couldn't work with me. So he said, but I can recommend my friend Fabrizio at Pantanal Safaris. So I sent an email to Fabrizio. We did a deal, and he wanted me to stay longer because to make sure we saw jaguars. But we saw jaguars every day when I was there. We had jaguars, caiman, crocodiles, and capybaras, and all kinds of stuff. So it basically, a lot of the websites too will have recommendations, from people. When I go to Kenya, I've never been to Kenya. Eventually, I want to do one of those safaris when my knees are no longer allowing me to do the hikes and the outdoor stuff. Then I would fly to Kenya. I'd go to the Masai Mara. Mm-hmm. I've been in touch with the Scots, the husband and wife team, who do a Netflix program, Tales by Light, as well. And they, basically, I know that their photographers, if I pay them money or somebody they recommend, I know I'm going to come back with pictures and the best opportunities. There's a lot of companies out there. I saw it in the Pantanal where, we'd found these cubs, and it was 35 Celsius. It was like blinding heat, basically, and no cloud cover. And we knew the mother was with 2 cubs hidden away in these bushes, and we were sitting there waiting. And then she brought 1 cub down for a drink of water at the river. So all the boats come out of our shore. We're on the other side of the river, and we come across. It's not very wide there, and we were all taking pictures. And then she led that cub away and came back with the other one, and we took more pictures. And then they went back into the shade, and you could see one of them, with its head down on its paws, just going to sleep in the shade. So we all retreated into the shade on the other side again. And this boat came along, and it was owned by an American company, and there was a lot of resentment from the locals that some of the American companies were coming in there hiring non-licensed guides from Peru and Venezuela and other South American countries, paying them peanuts, but not hiring locals. Mm-hmm. And so they, this boat was, but they give the tourists what they want. I won't say which photographer it was, but one one of them made a joke about one of these boats that came around, and he yelled, "Oh, here comes the battle cruiser!" And it was one of these American boats that had everybody had a matching khaki uniform. All the tourists had khaki uniforms and hats, and they had their lenses and cameras mounted to tripods that are built into the boat. They had cushioned seats, the whole thing, right? And so, it was like first class, but, they probably paid a lot of money for that. Anyway, we had one of these boats come by us, and the guide stopped the boat, and he's looking into the bush, wondering what we're looking at. And we're all sitting leaning back in our boats, away from the heat, waiting for another appearance of these cubs. And they stopped. The foreign guide stopped, and he's looking at us. He's looking into the woods, doesn't see anything, and then drives on. And one of the other guides that I met down there, very respected guide, he said, "Yeah, nothing to see here. Move on," in a sort of a derogatory manner, because they knew this guy was Peruvian, and he's coming, he's taking jobs away, and it's a particular American who's run afoul of the law apparently down there. I won't say his name, but there's a bit of controversy there, and that's one of the things too, is the hiring. When you find a guide, those that hire locals are preferred, and the customs then, and they're easier to work with as well, and more knowledgeable.
But you also want to be better received by the locals, right? So
see, during COVID, Hans, who is the owner of Boundless Ethiopia, and I've done trips with them 3 of the 4 times I've been there. I've done trips with him, and I'd recommend him in a heartbeat. He's gone overboard in a number of times. He contacted me and everybody else that has ever taken a trip with him when COVID broke out, and he pointed out that he's got most of his tourism in before COVID struck, because that's the tourism season there is October. It's a dry season, October till February, and then you get the rainy season, and then things slow down. But he said a lot of the people that work for him had no income, and the government wasn't doing anything for them, unlike our government. So there was a GoFundMe page. So we were putting money in there, and we could say, like, I wanted it to go to a particular person, and his family, and you could delineate that. And I was touched because I had an incident. I was coming back from the Bali Mountains in 2015 in the southern part of Ethiopia. And I was with a guide and a driver, and I was ecstatic because I'd photographed these wolves that we talked about earlier, and I'd got some lovely pictures and exotic birds and some landscape pictures and so on. I had a wonderful trip, and we're going through the town of Bakoji, which to the runners in the audience is famous. It's the town of runners. There's a documentary film called The Town of Runners, because it's where the Tirunesh Dababa and her sisters came from. They're all Olympic champions. It's where Kenenisa Bakila and his brother came from, and Derato Tulu and all these other Olympic champions have come from the same town. We're driving through Bakoji, and the kids are coming out of school, and there's hundreds of them come running across the road in the middle of the day. And my driver ran over a child. And, we heard all this screaming, like he'd slammed on his brakes. It's horrifying. And I see this 9 or 10-year-old child, little boy, crawling from underneath the vehicle, and we've run over his foot. So my guide, Dawit, or the driver, he jumps out and he picks the boy up and puts him on the back seat of our van. I took off my sweat top and he's bleeding everywhere. I'm wrap it around his foot and I'm trying to do first aid, elevating his foot, trying to stop the bleeding. And I said, where's there a hospital? Now you're in Bakoji, Ethiopia. And they said, there's one further down. I said, can you call the hospital, let them know we're coming? So we race down there. The boy's brother, who's older, he climbed in the van with us. So we drive to the hospital, they take him in, and after about 2 hours, the doctor came out and he spoke English, of course, and he said, what happened? And I told him, and he said he's going to be okay, but we're going to take him to Arcella, which is the nearest town. There's a surgeon there that can do the surgery. And so then we waited. The police arrived from Bakoji, and they came, and then we had to go with the police to the Bakoji police station. So, here we are, and I'm helpless, and I'm still in shock from seeing this poor boy, injured, and I was afraid that he would never walk again because it was horrific. And we got to the police station, and there's a sort of a stockade with prisoners in it. There's a building where there's soldiers or policemen dressed in police uniforms. There were 2 teenage boys in police uniforms that don't fit properly with machine guns, and they're waving at me, like I'm the only non-Ethiopian there, and they're waving at me, and the police chief, I guess it was the police chief, came out and gave me a hug, the greeting, traditional greeting, and he said, what happened? And I told him. And he went and looked at the vehicle, and then the next thing is I get a call from Hans, the tour operator from Addis. He said, Paul, the police have arrested Dawit, the driver. Under Ethiopian law, he has to be held until a judge can decide who's going to pay for what. And so he said they've impounded the car. The van. So I'm sending another driver for you. He'll be there in 4.5 or 5 hours. And I said, Hans, I've been here at the police station 2 hours. I was at the hospital 2 hours. I just want to get out of here. I said, I'm going to call Haile, my friend Haile Gebrselassie. So I called Haile and he said, hey, Paul, where are you? And he'd been calling me every few hours until that afternoon. He says, where are you? And I said, I'm at the Bakoji police station. And he goes, what happened? What happened? And I told him, he said, are you okay? Did the boy die? And I said, no, he's but he'll never walk again, I don't think. And he says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. This happens all the time in Ethiopia. Look, what can I do? I can have a driver there in half an hour. He can take you to Arcella, and you can stay in Derrida Tulu's hotel. A lot of the runners own hotels there. And Tulu was the first Black African to win an Olympic gold medal in the 1992 Olympics. So he said, you can go there. Do you want me to do that? I said, yes, please. So within half an hour, a guy came in and took me out against the objections of the police. And this guy had come to get me. He's got his arm around me and he's escorting me out of the police station. And they're yelling at me, the police, and he's yelling back at them. And all I could hear was something, 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 Haile. So as soon as they heard Haile's name, they all backed off. So he told them that I was a friend of Haile. So no, every tourist is going to have that same ace in the hole. But anyway, I got into the vehicle and the driver was Haile's brother, spitting image of Haile. I thought it was Haile. I was shocked, And we drove to Arcella. And I got there, went to pay the credit card for the hotel, and they said, no, Haile's taking care of it. So anyway, Haile kept calling me and make sure you're okay, and so on. The next morning, the driver that had been sent by Hans to get me came to the hotel to pick me up, and we were driving away, and from the town. And I'm still thinking about changing my airline ticket because I was it really upset me, to say the least, that we'd gone through this, that this boy and his family, was suffering. And we were driving along, and the driver said, Paul, do you mind if we stop at my house? I have my wife's shoes. I didn't have time to drop them for her when I came to get you last night. Can we do that? I said, yeah, no problem. I'm in no rush. So we went to his house. He said, would you like to come in and see where I live? And one of the things I've learned when you travel, you don't say no to for fear of insulting. People are genuinely nice, and they want to share with you. And he knew what had happened. I said, I'd love to, thank you. So we went inside, and there were two little small homes on the premises. His wife came out, and she was 9 months pregnant. I mean, she was about to have a baby any day, I think. And she had no shoes. And the shoes he was giving her were a pair of flip-flops. That's what he had in his car. And his mother was there, his sister, some nieces and nephews. They all came out. And the first thing, they were talking in Amharic. And then he translated for me. He said, are you hungry? Would you like something to eat? I said, I'm okay. I said, but I had a big breakfast, thank you. And then they talked again. Would you like coffee, traditional Ethiopian coffee? And I said, I'd love that. So we went inside one of the houses, and it was a pleasant experience because you're a guest in their home, and they want you to enjoy yourself, and you would insult them if you don't enjoy yourself. They roast the coffee beans in a traditional coffee ceremony. They do it right there in front of you on a little stove. And you drink the coffee like it looks like as a cappuccino cup, those tiny cups, and you have instead of sugar, you have sweetgrass. Mm-hmm. And they serve plain popcorn with it. That's part of the ceremony. And I'm sitting while they're roasting the beans and cooking the coffee. I'm sitting there with my laptop open, with the photographs of the Ethiopian wolf that I followed, and I have the kids on either side of me looking at these pictures, and they're just in awe. And it was so wonderful to share that with them because they've only seen pictures. They don't know a lot about, wolves that are, I guess about 180, 200 kilometers away from them because they never see them live, So I'm showing them pictures, and they're just in awe. It was just a wonderful experience to share that. We had the coffee, and then when we left, I said to the driver, I said, thank you so much for that. It's renewed my faith in mankind, the hospitality you've shown me. And so this is a long story, but I'm going back to the point was I wanted to make sure his family was taken care of. They had a baby boy, and Hans had followed up with me and told me about the family and all that stuff. So, but when you find a guide that is genuine, that cares about the people who are working for him, and you have this affinity towards them, it makes the experience 100% better for everybody. In the Simeon Mountains, I just tell this, when people say to me sometimes, what's your favorite picture from Ethiopia? And it's always, I tell them the story about these three ladies that I saw in the Simeon Mountains. I'd been picked up from the airport in Gondar, and I was being taken to this town, Debark, where you meet the guides, and then they drive you outside of town, and then you begin your 4-day hiking up and down these mountains. And I'm with the guide, with the driver, and he speaks a bit of English. He's been hired by Hans, and we're driving. We're nowhere near Debark, but the scenery it's like the Grand Canyon. So I said, can we stop here? I want to take a picture. So he stops the vehicle. He said, there'll be plenty of places like this. I said, but as a photographer, you think you're never going to see anything like this again, you know? So I stopped and there's these three ladies weaving at the side of this mountain. And I thought, you know, they were in colorful dress and so on. And I went over to them and I gestured, you know, can I take your picture? And the woman in the middle, she I think the two younger ones were the daughters of this one lady. And she went like this, the universal sign for money, you know, wants money. So I said to the driver, how much shall I give her? And he said, give them 10 burr each. 10 burr is about 30 cents. So I opened up my wallet and I pulled out, gave them each 10 burr and they sat there. And then the one in the middle, the one had gone like this, she said something in American, the three of them burst out laughing. And the shot of them laughing is what it summarizes Ethiopia to me. And I said to the driver, what did she say? And he started laughing. She said, I think I found a husband. but that's, you know, the experience with a local guide and a local company, and he's only hiring people that he can trust and can give you a good experience. Those experiences are you know, they're so memorable. Here I am telling the tale, and I've been on several trips since, and that still is a highlight in my travel career.
I had a similar experience in Dominican where a family friend went there and they said connect with these people, and it turned out somehow it's somebody off the resort, or I think it was a guide as well. And we connected with this man, and they had a daughter that was the same age as me, but they invited us back to their ranch essentially, and they have very, you know, many children and very small accommodations, but they pulled out a feast, a table of food, and we were brought in by motorcycles, and they had horses, and I went horseback riding, and we were like playing in this river, and it was just so beautiful in the jungle, right? And then we had the daughter stay with us at the resort. Basically, she was like my playmate, right? And but you know, there's something to be said to befriending the tour guides and just, you know, genuinely getting to know them and who they are and their families. And I think that's the best experience. And it was funny that you mentioned Tales by Light. It's one of my favorite shows.
It's great, isn't it?
Purpose of capturing, it's a bit of adventure, but it's the cultural, you know, story.
Well, it's funny, you know, I was up on one of my trips to Lebanon. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in Beirut 3 times from 2015, 2016, 2017 to do some publicity work for the Beirut Marathon. So on each of the trips, I would always tag on a couple of days to do something there, and then fly back to England to visit relatives and friends and stuff. But I went one time. I wanted to go to the Cedars of God, which is there. It's written about in the Bible, and it's just the place you go is a little village, and it's where the poet Khalil Gibran is from. So it's a very popular spot for anybody who goes to Lebanon. So I'd hired a taxi driver through a friend of mine who worked for the marathon. She trusted this taxi driver. I think I paid $75 US for the day, and he drove me up into the mountains and so on. And I wanted to get a picture. We came down this dirt road, and we're looking down into this valley, the Kadisha Valley, and it's absolutely stunning. And there's, you know, all these temples and churches and so on, and villages all the way. And you're looking, you know, again, it's like a major canyon, the Kadisha Valley. And we came upon this, what looked to be like a motel or a hotel at the end of this dirt road. And I wanted to get a picture from there. Anyway, there's a man standing there, and he's smoking a cigarette. And I said, hello, you know, how are you? And he said, I'm good, how are you? And I said, is this your hotel? He said, yes. And I said, it's very beautiful up here. Do you get a lot of people here? He said, in the ski season, we have people staying here. Nobody here right now. I said, do you mind if I use your washroom? He said, yes, by all means, go in there. So I come out, and he said, where are you from? Which is a common question in Beirut. And if you're from Canada, they love you. you know. And he said, I said, I'm from Canada. And he says, what part of Canada? I said, I live in Cambridge. He said, I lived in Ottawa for 20 years, Lebanese. So this was his restaurant. And he said, I'd like you to come in and have a coffee. I said, I'd love to, maybe on the way back, I said, because I want to go to the top of the valley and take some pictures while there's still some good light. So he said, yes, when you come back. So we went off and did our thing. And on the way back, we struggled, but we found this dirt road where his hotel was. And there was a young man standing outside. And I said, oh, do you work here? And he said, yes, it's my father's hotel. I said, I met him earlier. He says, yes, he's waiting for you. So the taxi driver and I went in, and there's the hotel owner and his wife and a couple of friends of theirs and some of the rest of their family. They've got a huge tuna that they've cooked. They've got salads. They got all this food laid out, ready for me. I was, certainly I thought we'd have a coffee, but he had a whole dinner there. And then they had this drink, and every country has its own strong drink, and he poured this it smelled like licorice and like ouzo, but it was their type of ouzo. So he's got a big flask of it and he's pouring it around. My taxi driver is drinking it as well, which I said, I'm glad I'm not driving, which was his hint to put it down. But I said, how much alcohol is in this? And the guy says, oh, I don't know, it's homemade. But those are the kind of experiences you get when you let your guard down and say yes to some hospitality.
Mm-hmm. No, well, so if people want to follow your work, where can they, where's your website? Because you're not on social media.
No, I got off that. I was on Instagram briefly, and then when my daughter's dog had more followers than me, I said, that's it, I have a website, paulgainsfoto.com, and it's Gaines without an E, paulgainsfoto.com. And I blog regularly, and if people want to be on my mailing list and be kept abreast of my upcoming book and any presentations I might be doing, then they can contact me through that website.
That's wonderful. We'll link to your upcoming recording, your webinar coming up. I'll get the link from you and maybe even some past. But yeah.
Yeah. So basically, this sort of went exactly how I kind of expected it, because having had thousands of conversations with you over the years, you sort of ask Paul something and an hour and a half goes by.
It's an hour and a half.
Yeah,
wow.
It was perfect timing, and I think it was just amazing to give people a glimpse of what adventure travel with wildlife photography could look like, and some tips along the way.
Well, and it ties into one of the things that we always are stressing, which is sort of find things you're passionate about, and if you can make that your work, that's great, because it's one of those things where time flies, and if you're not enjoying what you're doing.
Like we all know people who have quote unquote careers, and which more often than not prevent them from doing things that they really are passionate about. And it goes back to what I was telling my kids. We're not put on earth to work. We're put here to live, and work as a means to enjoy life. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you don't work hard, but if you have a goal that you want to do something, then how can you do it? Do the work to get it. But there's so many people, and when they talk about more than 50% of people are unhappy in their jobs, but they can't quit them because they have mortgages, they have cars they got to pay for, they have they're living perhaps beyond their means, and it's something that it's a rat race, and it's not the road that I want to take anymore, and that's why 26 years ago I said I don't want to do this event marketing when I'm 60 years old. I want to, and the travel, like it never feels like a job. I can remember the first time I went to Athens. It was the 1997 World Track and Field Championships, and I was freelancing then for the Globe and Mail. And I went for dinner one night with Steve Buffrey of the Toronto Sun and Randy Starkman, the late Randy Starkman of the Toronto Star, great guy. The three of us were having dinner together, and the conversation turned around to, the two of them were saying, I haven't had a day off in 35 days and blah, blah, blah. They're complaining about their work because their writing was a job and they had a lot of pressure and so on like that. And I said, guys, there's the Acropolis right there, lit up in front of us. We're eating, a fantastic meal here in Plaka in Athens. And I said, there are people back home would give their right leg to come and do what we're doing, But so it's easy to lose perspective of what life is all about, And I've been luckier than most because, I traveled a lot with, people paying my ticket. My last trip to Ethiopia, for instance, the Ethiopian Tourist Board paid for my airline ticket because I'd been there 3 times already, and somebody had a word with them about the fact I wasn't intending to go back, and then I got a call from the Great Ethiopian Run, and the race director said, are you coming over, Paul? We haven't heard from you. And I said, I don't think I'm going to make it this year. Oh, that's too bad. He says, we've got a ticket for you in a hotel from the Ethiopian Tourist Board. And I said, oh, okay, then that changes things. So I ended up going over there and getting a bunch of assignments to go with it. But so I've been very lucky in that regard. But and it's only the last, I guess, 8 or 9 years where I've thought, you know what, I've had enough of watching people run around a track. I like the outdoors so much. I want to make a living from that. You mentioned the people I've interviewed in the past, people in the music business. I do a lot of music writing, and I've interviewed Eric Clapton. I'm one of the few people in Canada that can say that Eric Clapton called them 3 times, because but one of my heroes, and talking with Deepak Chopra and Justin Trudeau and Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Jacques Villeneuve and Wayne Gretzky and many others, Usain Bolt. That's exciting, but when you're out there one-on-one with a snowy owl that's come to know you because you've been out there every day for 5 weeks, and now it's not afraid of you, and you can approach close enough that you can stand there talking to it, and it's just preening for 3 hours on a post while you're standing there looking at it. You're in their world. It's precious, and that owl I'm talking about literally caught an American kestrel while I was in the field with her. She came down, scared another owl away that I'd been photographing. She came down, caught a kestrel, which is the smallest member of one of the smallest members of the hawk family, and ate it in front of me, like 10 or 15 meters away. And for an hour and a half, I'm there lying in the snow taking pictures of her, and she's eating this thing, and that's being comfortable around an animal, and her being comfortable with me. It's those are moments, if I never cover another track and field meet, I'm happy. Been to 5 Olympic Games and 11 World Championships, and the thrills are still out there for me, and I've yet to photograph a moose, and that's my big challenge now. So
Awesome. Keep heading up north.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your stories.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, and stay outdoors and stay well.
And for all of our listeners, remember, work hard, play dirty, and try not to get sick. That's all we can say this time.
Awesome.
Until next time, I'm Winston.
I'm Catherine.
See you later.
Bye.